Human engineer rebuilds fallen alien War-Cyborg from junkyard scraps. In the faded light of Zeta-7's twin suns, Adrian Vale surveyed the metal graveyard before him. The enormous junkyard stretched across miles of barren land, a labyrinth of twisted metal, abandoned starship hulls, and shattered machinery from wars long past. To most, it was a wasteland, but to Adrian, it was a treasure trove. He wiped the sweat from his brow, a faint smear of grease streaking across his forehead. Earth had never seen metal quite like this, alloys that seemed to drink in the light, materials that responded to energy with a sentience almost of their own. If he could unlock even a fraction of the secrets within, the possibilities for humankind would be limitless. Today, though, he wasn't here for spare parts or research, he was here for a relic, one he'd heard rumors about from a contact who'd claimed to know the scrapyard's secrets, a fallen cyborg from the Balar Wars. Adrian knelt beside a large pile of scrap, brushing aside rusted bolts and wires until he uncovered what he was looking for: a dormant Balarian War-Cyborg, half buried and fused to the ground, covered in a layer of red Martian dust. The Balarians were legends in every corner of the galaxy, fierce, biomechanical warriors with their entire civilization adapted for battle. They'd come to conquer, to wipe humanity off the star map, and yet, here he was, face to face with one of their most feared creations, now broken and forgotten in a junkyard. Adrian leaned in, examining her structure. Despite the wear, he could still see the elegant craftsmanship in her design: sleek armor plating, streamlined limbs, and embedded weapon systems that had since decayed. She had a humanoid form, with features that could almost be called beautiful, though her face was still, her eyes closed. Her body lay in fragments, arms detached, chest armor split, her power core burned out. For any other salvager, she was a lost cause. But Adrian had rebuilt whole androids from a single shattered AI chip. If there was even a whisper of life left, he'd find it. He began gathering tools, a rush of excitement stirring as he connected to the AI unit embedded in her remaining circuits. Her systems were still faintly humming, running on a tiny reserve power source. With a careful pulse of his toolkit's diagnostic node, he sent a ping through her system. Diagnostic start. Error. Error. A faint tremor ran through the machine, and Adrian leaned in closer. Her fingers twitched, barely perceptible, but unmistakably there. The trace of sentience was faint but enough for Adrian to work with. "All right, girl," he murmured, "let's see if you want to come back to life." Hours passed as Adrian worked, lost in the task. He used bits and pieces from other machines around the yard, repairing her circuitry with precision, reconnecting the muscle-like fibers under her armor plating. Eventually, as he adjusted her ocular interface, a pair of faint lights flickered to life in her eyes, dim but aware. The cyborg's eyes focused on Adrian, calculating and scanning, as if assessing him. She tried to speak, but her voice came through as a static-filled whisper, the remnants of a language once spoken by an ancient warrior race. Adrian leaned in, activating his translator module. "Do you understand me?" Her gaze, sharp and unnervingly intense, shifted to him. In a strained, metallic voice, she managed a single word: "Why?" "Because you're a marvel," Adrian replied simply, "and it'd be a waste for something like you to rot here." She blinked, her processors slowly picking up speed as he continued his work. Her name, encoded deep within her core, came online: Kayla X7, Commander Unit of the 5th Balarian Fleet, and with it, memories of countless battles, fierce glories, and the weight of a lost purpose. "You're a fighter, aren't you, Kayla X7?" Adrian asked, studying her face. "Fighter," she repeated, the word almost foreign, as if struggling to grasp its meaning. "Yes," she murmured finally, her voice becoming clearer. "Once I was." Her eyes dimmed briefly as if she were reaching into a buried past. Then, something like sadness flickered across her metallic features. Adrian paused, realizing that he wasn't just piecing together parts of a machine. He was awakening something else: an old soldier, an exiled warrior. He felt a pang of empathy he hadn't anticipated. "Kayla," he said, trying to keep his tone steady, "I don't know what happened to you, but I can give you a second chance if you want it." Her gaze, which had been dull and broken, shifted, the faintest glimmer of purpose returning. It was strange, watching a machine display so much emotion, but Adrian knew she was far more than the sum of her parts. She was a legend reborn, even if she hadn't yet realized it. She nodded, A silent agreement that she would accept this second life, whatever it might bring. For the first time in years, Adrian felt an electric thrill at the unknown possibilities ahead. He was ready to bring Kayla X7 back, piece by piece, and perhaps show her a new way to be a warrior, one that didn't require a battlefield strewn with the remains of her enemies. And as the suns dipped lower, casting a crimson glow over the junkyard, Adrian knew one thing for sure: this was only the beginning. For the next few days, Adrian barely slept. The junkyard became his makeshift laboratory, its scattered scrap heaps transformed into supplies for his work. Piece by piece, he revived Kayla X7, salvaging components, rewiring circuits, and occasionally consulting ancient schematics from old Belerian data archives he'd managed to acquire. Kayla watched him work in silence, her gaze often distant, as though trying to process the memories of battles past. She seemed haunted. Whenever Adrian spoke to her, her responses were clipped, wary. She was an enigma, a machine bearing the instincts of a soldier but something else too, a sense of conflict, as though her own programming was at odds with what she had once been. "Why do you hesitate to move?" he asked one night, tightening a bolt on her shoulder joint. "Your system diagnostics show you're nearly at full function." Kayla shifted her gaze away. "I was not meant to be rebuilt." Her voice had gained clarity, but it still held that cold, metallic tone. "You're meant to survive," he replied with a shrug, "just like anyone else." Kayla's fingers flexed, the servos humming quietly as she examined her own hands. "Belerian warriors do not survive. They succeed, or they perish. Our only purpose was victory." She looked up, her metallic eyes narrowing. "And I failed." Adrian sighed. "Look, if we judged ourselves by our past mistakes, none of us would have a reason to keep going. Besides, if there's one thing I know, it's that purpose is something you can rebuild too." He gave her a reassuring grin. "Like new parts." She watched him in silence for a long moment, processing his words in a way that felt deeply unmachine-like. Days turned into weeks. With each repair, Kayla regained more of her abilities, and with each milestone, her memory sharpened. Adrian sometimes caught glimpses of her fighting past as her self-repair protocols kicked in, fragments of her being a commander, leading her platoon, the thrill of triumph in battle, and the crushing weight of failure. But there was something different about the way she interacted with Adrian. The more he rebuilt her, the more she began to understand the peculiar nature of this human, the way he worked tirelessly, his jokes, his insistence on a purpose beyond fighting. One evening, as Adrian was examining her damaged core processor, Kayla interrupted his work. "Why did you not leave me broken?" He paused, meeting her gaze. "Maybe because I didn't see you as broken." "You're more than a machine, Kayla. I mean, I've worked on plenty of cyborgs and AIs, but you think differently. You feel. Emotions are inefficient," she muttered, though there was a flicker of hesitation in her voice. "Maybe. But inefficiency makes us, well, us. We fight for different things. Not just survival or glory. I fight for family, friends, all the people I care about." He chuckled. "Honestly, I think we humans are as much a mystery to you as you are to me." Kayla studied him, silent and contemplative. She hadn't understood it at first, the notion of fighting for something beyond victory. The Belerians had been created to expand, to conquer, to serve the ruthless instinct of their creators. But there was a strange satisfaction in learning, in rebuilding. And this human, this engineer, didn't seem interested in using her as a weapon. He seemed intent on giving her something she'd never known, a choice. One night, as the twin suns set, Kayla stood at the edge of the junkyard, staring at the vast, star-speckled sky. She was now fully operational, her systems at peak functionality. Adrian had even modified some of her components with technology she'd never seen, to tools for repair, defensive measures rather than offensive weapons. She felt different, almost like she was discovering herself anew. Adrian approached, his coat draped around him to block the chill of the night. "So, Kayla, now that you're all patched up, what's next for you?" She looked at him, her metallic face softened by the faint glow of her ocular lights. "In my culture, warriors are not given second chances." "Well, welcome to humanity, then." "We're big on second chances," Adrian said, smirking. "I don't understand why you trust me," she said, her voice hesitant. "I was created for war. It is all I know." Maybe it was, Adrian replied, his voice soft but resolute. But that doesn't mean it's all you can be. Kayla remained silent, her gaze distant as though watching 1,000 battles play out in her mind. Slowly, she looked back at him. What is it, to be human? Adrian chuckled. We're all still figuring that out, honestly. It's about finding a purpose that matters to you. And sometimes, it's just about surviving and trying to make things better, one piece at a time. She looked at her hands again, the faint hum of her servos reminding her of her restored strength. You gave me life, beyond my purpose. She hesitated, the weight of her words making her voice softer than Adrian had ever heard. I want to understand. He nodded, offering his hand. Then let's find a new purpose together. And as they stood there, surrounded by the discarded remnants of old wars, Kayla took his hand, embracing this strange, new path. In that moment, she knew she had been rebuilt for more than battle. She had been rebuilt to discover a future that only she could create. In the weeks that followed, Kayla found herself adapting to this strange, unpredictable life Adrian had shown her. The junkyard, once a graveyard of forgotten tech, became a sprawling canvas for her newfound curiosity. She'd roam through the mounds of scrap, picking apart forgotten relics, scanning them with her internal systems, and sorting anything she found useful. Adrian watched her from the workshop, a smile on his face as she inspected a rusted drone's wiring with childlike fascination. For all her programming, for all her memories of battle, she was experiencing the world anew and for the first time, not as a weapon. One evening, as Kayla meticulously arranged piles of scrap parts on the table in the workshop, Adrian couldn't resist asking, So, Commander Kayla X7, ever get bored just tinkering with spare parts? No urge to go full battle mode? Kayla looked up, her metallic features softened by an odd spark of humor. Are you offering me a target, Adrian Vale? He held up his hands, feigning alarm. Oh, absolutely not. I value my limbs very much, thank you. A faint smile played on her lips, a movement so subtle he'd almost missed it. It wasn't much, but it felt like a breakthrough. This wasn't the cold, disciplined warrior he'd reawakened in that junkyard. She was something warmer now, someone exploring a path that was entirely her own. But beneath her newly found calm, Kayla could still feel echoes of her past, like specters at the edges of her thoughts. There were flashes she couldn't control, images of her fleet in formation, marching across foreign worlds, standing over the remains of her enemies. She tried to bury them, to ignore them as Adrian taught her about repairing, creating, and, strangest of all, laughing. Yet one night, the past refused to stay silent. It started with a faint signal, a thread of alien code Kayla picked up on her internal scanners while she was sifting through old circuits in the junkyard. The signal was weak, decayed from years of interference, but unmistakable. It was Belerian. Her hands froze, and her internal systems flared to life, all the old programming sparking awake. The code carried the seal of her old fleet, encoded in a command sequence meant for only one recipient, Kayla X7. She traced the signal, adjusting her sensors until she pinpointed it to an abandoned relay tower on the outskirts of the junkyard. Without a word to Adrian, she set off, her steps faster, more mechanical than he'd ever seen. When she reached the base of the relay tower, the signal grew stronger. There, lying half-buried under a collapsed column, was a Belerian tactical beacon, pulsing faintly. It was severely damaged, but its purpose was clear, to call any surviving members of the fleet back to arms. Kayla crouched over the beacon, the dull glow reflecting in her eyes. Her old instincts stirred, demanding obedience, urging her to report back to the fleet, to fall back into the line of duty she'd once known. Her fingers tightened around the beacon, her mind fighting against the reawakening of that familiar drive. But before she could do anything, she heard footsteps crunching behind her. She turned to find Adrian standing there, his brow furrowed in concern. Kayla, what are you doing out here? He asked, his gaze shifting to the beacon in her hand. The realization dawned on him, and his face darkened. That's a call to arms, isn't it? Kayla lowered her head. It is, my duty. Is it? Adrian's voice was quiet but firm. Or is it just what you were programmed to do? She struggled, her voice a mix of conflict and pain. I am Belerian. My purpose is war. I cannot deny my function. This beacon, it is a call to return to my fleet, to fulfill my duty. Adrian took a step forward, his expression hardening. But you've been more than just a warrior. Kayla, You've been learning, exploring, choosing. Is that really worth giving up? Her hands clenched around the beacon, trembling as if in revolt. The memories of battle, the instincts burned into her very code. They screamed at her to answer the call. But then she looked up, meeting Adrian's steady gaze. He wasn't giving her commands or orders. He was offering her a choice. You rebuilt me, she said, her voice wavering. You gave me a new life, Adrian, but can I escape the life I was made for? Adrian sighed, taking another step forward until he was close enough to place a hand on her arm. Kayla, I think you've already started escaping it. This call doesn't control you, not anymore. She gazed down at the beacon, the light fading in her reflection. For a long, tense moment, she was silent. Then, slowly, she released her grip on the beacon, letting it drop to the ground. I do not wish to return to the fleet, she said, her voice resolute. I am more than that now. Adrian smiled, relief flooding his features. Good, because you're not just a relic of the past. Kayla, you're a part of something new. And besides, he added with a wry grin, who else would help me scavenge through this endless pile of scrap? For the first time, Kayla's laugh was genuine, a strange sound that echoed through the junkyard. It felt foreign yet natural, as though she'd finally unlocked a part of herself that had been hidden all along. As the days passed, Adrian noticed a shift in her demeanor. Kayla was lighter somehow, freer. She worked beside him with a new purpose, no longer driven by her old commands or programming but by a curiosity that seemed boundless. She even began crafting devices on her own, designing small drones and modifying her own systems for purposes far removed from war. One evening, while they were working late on a small, experimental hovercraft, Adrian found himself watching her in awe. She had become more than just an old war machine. She was a companion, a creator, and perhaps even a friend. You know, Kayla, he said, breaking the comfortable silence between them, if anyone from the old Belerian fleet could see you now, they wouldn't even recognize you. She looked up from the hovercraft, her gaze steady but warm. Perhaps not, but that is a good thing, isn't it? Adrian nodded, smiling. Yeah, it really is. They continued to work in the quiet, side by side, the clinks of tools and hum of machinery filling the night air. Kayla's hands moved deftly over the hovercraft, her touch more delicate, more precise than any human engineer's. For the first time in her life, if it could even be called that, Kayla felt truly alive. Her past battles merely shadows that no longer dictated her future. She had been rebuilt for more than war. She had been rebuilt to discover what it meant to create, to connect, and to make choices. And as they worked together in that lonely junkyard under the endless stars, Kayla knew she had found something greater than any victory she had ever won, a purpose of her own.